Did you know the earliest critics of the resurrection never actually denied the empty tomb? Let that sink in for a moment. They just tried, desperately, to explain it away. Think about what that really means. We are talking about an event so world-shattering, so profoundly undeniable, that even those who stood in staunch opposition to it, those who had every reason to want it to be a lie, couldn't argue that the body of Jesus was still in its grave. That's a powerful, powerful statement, isn't it? It's a historical bedrock. It means that everyone, friend and foe alike, right there in first-century Jerusalem, agreed on one fundamental fact. The tomb was empty. The real debate, the one that raged then and continues to echo today, was never about if the body was gone. The question was, and has always been, how it happened. This is such a critical starting point because in our modern world, a world saturated with skepticism and a relentless news cycle that makes yesterday's miracles feel like today's ancient history, so many are quick to dismiss the resurrection. They label it as a myth, a legend, something easily debunked by science or common sense. But the historical evidence, when you truly take the time to look at it, tells a much different, much more compelling, and frankly, a much more challenging story. So let's dig into that evidence together, because what you find there, what has been preserved through the ages, it truly has the power to change everything you thought you knew. For centuries, you see, people have questioned the reliability of these ancient texts. It's a fair question, a logical one. People say, how can we possibly trust documents that were written down 2,000 years ago? Surely they've been corrupted over time. It's like a game of telephone, where the message gets distorted with each telling. This is an honest objection, and it's a question that serious, dedicated scholars, men and women of faith and no faith at all, have spent their entire lives researching. They've dedicated their careers to the painstaking work of textual criticism, comparing manuscript after manuscript, hunting for discrepancies, trying to piece together the most accurate possible version of the original writings. And for a long time, there was a significant gap in the manuscript evidence for the Old Testament. The oldest copies we had were from the Middle Ages, leaving a 1,000-year gap between when they were written and when the original events happened. Skeptics pointed to this gap as proof that we couldn't possibly know what the originals said. But then, something happened. Something completely unexpected. In the caves near the Dead Sea, a discovery was made that would send shockwaves through the worlds of archaeology and biblical scholarship. We're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. This incredible discovery, made between 1946 and 1957, was like finding a time capsule. It pushed back our oldest Old Testament manuscripts by a full 1,000 years, bridging that very gap that critics had pointed to for so long. It was a monumental moment. And what did they find in those ancient clay jars? They found scrolls, hundreds of them, preserved in the dry desert air for 2 millennia. Among them was the Great Isaiah Scroll. It was a complete copy of the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when scholars carefully unrolled it and compared it to the Masoretic text, the version they had from the Middle Ages, 1,000 years later, what they found was breathtaking. The scroll was virtually identical. This wasn't just a case of being similar. We're talking about a level of preservation over a millennium that is simply unmatched in any other ancient literature. It absolutely stunned the scholarly community. It was a direct, physical refutation of the game of telephone argument. It crushed the Bible had been hopelessly distorted or intentionally rewritten over time. It demonstrated, with tangible proof, that the ancient Jewish scribes had a system of copying their sacred scriptures with a level of precision and reverence that is, frankly, mind-blowing, even by our modern standards. They believed they were copying the very words of God, and they treated that task with the utmost seriousness. This discovery provides a solid foundation for our confidence in the meticulous transmission of these ancient texts through the centuries. But what about the New Testament? What about the central figure of it all, Jesus himself? Did he even exist? In online forums and social media comment sections, you'll often hear people claim he was just a myth, a legend concocted by his followers, a composite of pagan dying and rising gods. But this is a fringe theory that is not taken seriously by professional historians. Even the most skeptical scholars, men like Bart Ehrman, a renowned Bible critic who has built a career on pointing out what he sees as contradictions in the New Testament, even he concedes that a first-century Jewish rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth did indeed walk the dusty streets of Roman-occupied Judea. These are not the words of a believer, but of a critical historian examining the evidence. Scholars, by and large, agree that Jesus lived, and that he was crucified under the authority of the Roman governor Pontius Pilate around the beginning of the 1st century. The historical reality is that we have more evidence for the existence of Jesus of Nazareth than we have for almost any other figure from his time period. Think about the nature of that evidence. We have the 4 Gospels, multiple, independent biographies of his life. But it doesn't stop there. We have the letters of the Apostle Paul, some of which were written as early as the late 40s AD, just 15 to 20 years after the events themselves. That is incredibly early for historical sources from the ancient world. Then you have the public testimonies of the apostles. These men didn't just quietly whisper their beliefs in secret. They stood in the public square, in the synagogues, and before the authorities, and they proclaimed that the man who had been publicly executed by the Roman state was alive. And they didn't just preach this message. They lived it, and ultimately, they died for it. They faced beatings, they were thrown into prisons, they were exiled, and many of them, according to strong early tradition, were executed for their unwavering claim. People might die for a belief they think is true, even if it's false. But people do not, as a rule, willingly suffer and die for something they know for a fact is a lie they themselves have fabricated. Their consistent, sacrificial witness in the face of immense pressure adds serious weight to their credibility. It's a factor we cannot afford to ignore. And consider where this movement began. The early spread of Christianity didn't happen in some faraway land decades later. It exploded in the city of Jerusalem itself. This is the very place where the resurrection could have been most easily and swiftly disproven. If the whole story was a lie, all the authorities had to do was go to the tomb, produce the body of Jesus, and parade it through the streets. That would have been the end of Christianity before it even began. But they never did. They couldn't. The body was gone. And so this movement, led by a group of uneducated fishermen and tax collectors, began to grow. In just 300 years, Christianity went from a small, persecuted Jewish sect to the dominant faith in the entire Roman Empire. It's an unprecedented historical phenomenon. This faith had no political power behind it, no military force to compel conversions, no immense wealth to entice followers. It spread through personal witness, through acts of sacrificial love, like caring for the sick and abandoned during deadly plagues when Roman citizens, including doctors, fled the cities, and through the unwavering conviction of these early believers. How do you explain that trajectory? How does a religion founded on the worship of a crucified criminal in a remote province of the empire come to conquer the hearts and minds of the empire itself? You have to account for that. You can't just brush it aside. Some today try to hold on to the fruits of this worldview, the concepts of universal human rights, intrinsic dignity, and compassion for the poor, while cutting off the roots of the belief system that produced them. But that's not sustainable in the long run. Eventually, when you sever the roots, the entire tree withers. We see the beginnings of that withering in our own culture today. Now, inevitably, when you discuss this, you'll hear people bring up other so-called Gospels. Books like The Gospel of Jesus' Wife or The Gospel of Barnabas. These are often presented as suppressed ancient alternatives, hidden truths that offer a different narrative. A narrative where Jesus wasn't divine, or perhaps wasn't even crucified. These claims often gain a lot of traction, especially online, because they are sensational. People love a good conspiracy theory, don't they? It feels like you're being let in on a secret that the powerful don't want you to know. But when you apply the same historical scrutiny to these documents as you do to the biblical texts, they fall apart very quickly. Let's look at the facts. The Gospel of Jesus' Wife, which made international headlines a few years ago, was a tiny papyrus fragment that contained the phrase, "Jesus said to them, 'My wife.'" It was promoted by a Harvard professor, and the media ran with it. But it was quickly exposed as a modern forgery. How do we know? Scholars discovered that its Coptic text was copied directly from a modern, online PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas. Not just copied, but it included a unique grammatical error, a typo, that existed only in that specific digital version. Think about that. It's the ancient equivalent of a counterfeiter leaving a watermark from Microsoft Word on their fake document. Even though the papyrus itself was genuinely ancient, forgers often use old materials to seem more authentic. The text written on it was from a 21st century document. The professor who had initially promoted it, Karen King, later had to acknowledge that it was, in fact, a forgery. And what about the Gospel of Barnabas? This is another document sometimes cited, especially in Muslim apologetics, because it claims Jesus predicted the coming of Muhammad. But again, when you examine the text, it's filled with glaring anachronisms. It describes things like medieval castles and feudal social structures that simply did not exist in first-century Judea. It paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in the 14th century AD. It's like finding a supposed diary from Julius Caesar where he talks about riding a motorcycle and checking his email. The timeline, the cultural references, the entire context is completely wrong. These documents are obvious fakes, and this isn't just a Christian conclusion. Even secular historians who have no theological stake in the game agree. These alternative gospels were rejected by the early church not because of some grand conspiracy to suppress the truth, but because they were clearly fraudulent. They had no credible connection to the apostolic circle. The four biblical gospels, on the other hand, were accepted because they could be traced back to the eyewitnesses or their close companions. They aligned with the core Orthodox doctrine that had been passed down from the beginning, and they were widely used and recognized in churches all across the known world from a very early date. This brings us to the question of bias. People will say, "Of course you believe this, you're a Christian, you're biased." And you know what? They're right. I am biased. But everyone is biased. The atheist who starts with the assumption that miracles are impossible is biased. The agnostic, who insists that we can never truly know anything for sure, is biased. The Muslim who is committed to the Quran as the final revelation is biased. We all bring our own assumptions, our own worldviews, to the table when we look at evidence. The real question isn't who is biased. The real question is which bias, which worldview, best accounts for the full range of historical data we have. When we examine the historical data surrounding the life of Jesus, his brutal death by crucifixion, and the explosive claims of his resurrection from his followers, the explanation that best fits all the facts isn't a convenient myth, or a hallucination, or a stolen body. The best explanation is that something massive, something unprecedented actually happened. Something that transformed a group of terrified, defeated fishermen into bold, world-changing witnesses who turned the world upside down. Think about the sheer psychological impossibility of the disciples' behavior otherwise. After witnessing the brutal, public, humiliating execution of their leader by the most powerful military force on the planet, what would be the natural human response? It would be to run, to hide, to disassociate yourself from this failed movement to save your own skin. And that is exactly what they did initially. Peter, their supposed leader, denied even knowing Jesus 3 times. They were scattered, scared, and locked in an upper room, fearing for their lives. But then, just a few days later, these same men are out in the public streets of Jerusalem, the very city where Jesus was just executed, proclaiming to everyone that he is alive and that he is Lord. If they were lying, if they had stolen the body as the authorities claimed, why would they go back to the scene of the crime? Why would they risk their lives for a fabrication that could have been so easily disproven by the production of a body? Their behavior makes no sense if it's a lie. It's the behavior of men who have seen something that has completely shattered their previous understanding of reality. It's the behavior of people who are not perpetuating a hoax, but who are compelled by a truth so powerful. They are willing to die for it. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is not just a theological concept or a comforting story. It is a historical question grounded in evidence. You have a man who objectively lived, who objectively died a very public death, and then, shortly after, a significant number of individuals from his inner circle, and even former skeptics like his own brother James, and enemies like Saul of Tarsus, claimed to have seen him, spoken with him, and eaten with him, alive again. This is, to put it mildly, a highly unusual activity. It is a singular claim in the history of the world, and the amazing part, the part that has echoed through 20 centuries, is the mountain of evidence that suggests it actually happened. So why does any of this matter to you today, right now, in 2025? It matters because the implications of this one event are cosmos-sized. If Jesus truly and bodily rose from the dead, then it means his claims about himself are true. It means he is who he said he was, God in the flesh. It means that death is not the end. It means there is a real, tangible hope beyond the grave, a hope that is stronger than disease, stronger than suffering, and stronger than death itself. It means there is a purpose to your life, a meaning that transcends the temporary pursuits of career, pleasure, or possessions. It means the universe is not just a chaotic cosmic accident, a random collision of particles, #meta, pause, tooltips 0.05, but that it is the intentional creation of a personal God who knows you and loves you. This isn't a call to blind faith. It's an invitation to examine the evidence, to consider the historical data, and to grapple with a compelling narrative that demands an explanation. So, where do you stand on this? Have you ever truly taken the time to examine the evidence for yourself? Have you moved past the caricatures and the sound bites and really considered the alternative explanations? Do they adequately account for all the historical facts? The empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances, the transformation of the disciples, the birth of the church. This isn't just an ancient story with no relevance to your modern life. It is the story. It's the pivotal event of all human history. It is a living truth that has shaped civilizations, inspired the greatest art and music, built hospitals and universities, and personally transformed countless millions of lives. Don't let sensationalist claims from modern forgeries or the pervasive cynicism of our age prevent you from investigating the most important question ever asked. It is a truth worth seeking, it is a truth worth finding, and it is a truth that has the power to change your life, not just for now, but for all eternity. The evidence is there. The challenge is to look.